Okay, thank you very much to the Prime Minister, and it is now time for the Leader of the Opposition. Floor is yours.
When someone is brought up to believe a certain idea, it is impossible to think that they will change their mindset automatically, and this is what team opposition believes. Now, before I move on to my substantive, I'd like to refute a few things that the first speaker has presented. She's talked about that these religious groups have to change their mindset as society changes. However, this is a very idealistic notion. However, the matter of the fact is that it's not that easy. People can't just change what they were brought up to believe, and I will move into this in my substantive. I'll talk about this in my substantive. And she's also talked about how acceptance is easy, and how acceptance is the first step. However, accepting can even be hard for many people. These religious minorities, they truly believe what they were brought up to believe, and just saying that accepting would be easy, it's also very idealistic, and we don't think that they are looking at it in a more realistic way. So, third, no thank you. She has talked about persecution, and she has talked about how religion promotes acceptance and helping individuals and peace, and how because of this we shouldn't persecute LGBT. However, but why is it that people still, how is it that religious groups think otherwise? They believe, because of these religious texts and so on, no thank you, because of these texts, they believe otherwise, and they have, those are their thoughts. Also, she has talked about these religious groups and how they persecute these LGBT and how it's very harmful for them. However, it's also the religious groups' right to believe what they believe, and so on. Now I'd like to present what our team will be talking about. First of all, the burden on our team is to prove three main points. First of all, no thank you. First of all, religious groups have the same beliefs they had in the past right now. Also, how acceptance of gay marriage undermines their beliefs and their interests. Third of all, how acceptance from religious groups doesn't fix the core issue of the problem. Now, as first speaker, I'll be talking about the cultures and traditions of these religious groups, and my second speaker will be talking about how these religious groups accepting gay marriage, no thank you, how accepting these gay marriages doesn't act in their interests, nor attack the real problem at hand, which is the social mindset. Now, we understand, no thank you, now we understand that these gay marriages should be accepted in society, and we understand that it is their right. However, it isn't the religious group's interest to accept them. Before we expand on this, I'd like to talk a little bit about religion and these religious groups. Religion has sentimental meaning for people. It can completely change people's outlook on life, how they think and what they believe. These religious groups are brought up to believe things that their religion has taught them all their lives. So we have. I'll take you in just a moment, madam. So we have come across a problem in this debate. But either way, it isn't the religious group's interests anyway. So I'll take your.
Religions fundamentally promote tolerance, love, as well as goodwill. You violate all of these core tenets.
Well, the thing is, that is what we like to believe, but in reality, it isn't like that. Why is it that people still believe that, why is it that some religious groups still believe that LGBT are, they're against God's favor or will? And why is that? Because the reality of the situation is that that those religious groups believe otherwise, and no thank you, and that how religion promotes the well-being of individuals is a very idealistic idea, and we believe, and team opposition likes to look at it in a more realistic manner, in a realistic way. So, since there's people that are in these religious groups, they're brought up in the way for thousands of years. This religion, this culture has been passed on, and now we are saying that they shouldn't believe what they believe in. This is a completely ludicrous and implausible idea, ladies and gentlemen. First, let's talk about the ludicrous notion. something, that they will defend, to believe something, they will defend it and they will speak in favor of it. So ask yourselves, ladies and gentlemen, is it in the interest of these people, of these religious groups, some groups that are against gay marriage, the way that they were raised, condone something that they were raised to believe was wrong? So think about it. For a while. And with that in mind, let's move on to the implausible notion. No, thank you, madam. So it is unviable and also impossible to ask for these people to change their mindset. For example, the Bible. It clearly states that these LGBTs are against the will of God. Now, because of this, many people believe in it. And their parents raised them to believe this, and the environment was shaped for them to believe this way. So it's just looking at it this way, it's impossible for these people to believe otherwise. They were brought up this way, and just saying that it's their interest to accept issues. I'll take you just in a moment, madam. So it's just impossible for these people to change it. Yes, madam.
Religious groups shape the beliefs of their followers. Therefore, your side will simply give your followers more rhetoric, more reason to hate this.
Excuse me, could you repeat that?
Religious groups shape the beliefs of their followers. Therefore, if your religious groups are accepting of gay marriages, their followers will similarly become more accepting of gay marriage.
Well, that is true. The religion does shape. The religion shapes the mindset of the people, and that is what we are talking about. However, however, the interests of these people, since the religious groups, they're brought up in the way to believe otherwise. It's still in the interest of the people, so we believe that it's still idealistic for team proposition to say that religion promotes these individual well-being and so on, and we believe that team opposition is looking at it in a more realistic manner. So, ladies and gentlemen, because people cannot change their mindset, and because society cannot automatically change what they believe in, we are proud to oppose. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much to Gordon, the leader of the opposition. And it is now time for Losius as the second speaker of the government to further the case.
In their first speaker, opposition thought that the Bible spelled out explicitly the condemnation of gays. But when you actually go and read the Bible, there is no mention of this whatsoever. It's merely an interpretation of a religious text by the individuals who claim to follow it. And it's exactly because it's an interpretation, it's precisely because of that we can change it under our paradigm. The fundamental flaw in opposition was that they completely misinterpreted religions as being necessarily static and unchanging. That's not true. They claimed that it would be enormously difficult for religions to change. That's also not true. Because on proposition, while we acknowledge that it might take a certain amount of time to change, we maintain that this kind of acceptance is fairly easy and realistic to achieve. Because we have a historical precedent of religions altering their practices and altering their beliefs with the progression of society, changing them as a result. We gave you examples in my first speaker of changing mentalities towards contraceptives. I'm going to give you a further example of how the church has changed its basic practices even though it initially flouted its own basic principles. Because in the past, the Roman Catholic Church only distributed its materials in the Latin language. They claimed that any other language that religious texts were published in was somehow unholy and non-sacred. But they gradually changed this because they recognized that it was in their best interest to spread their religion to a wider number of people, and so started publishing material in vernacular languages such as English. We hence see religions having the ability to change their basic principles with time, and we don't see how it's any different with gay marriage, because the acceptance of gay marriage is consistent with their principles of acceptance, and all of that allows for them to change it easily and readily. Even then, in all of their material, opposition never linked their argumentation as being in the best interests of these religious groups. But we're going to take down their points anyway in two main points of contention. Firstly, with regard to the very interlinked notions of cultures, tradition, and social mindsets, and secondly, on their responses to my first speaker. On the point of contention on cultures and tradition, on social mindsets, which was the main body of their first opposition speaker's speech. And here's where the side of opposition essentially maintained that because beliefs were so entrenched in people that they are prone to rejecting any form of change. Now, in my preamble, I've already argued how religion changes with society and vice versa, and thus it's extremely easy for them to change, and it's realistic to expect them to change in this manner. Let's now look at the impact on the people, which is what opposition was concerned about, because we recognize adherence to religion as listening to the religious authority. They are extremely subservient to what the top-down approach says, they receive any messages and change their behavior as a result. For example, what messages that the Pope issues in his epistles to the public are gradually accepted as being an integral part of the Roman Catholic faith. Anything that the Imams of Islam say to the people is accepted as being representative of Islam. Therefore, when the religious group begins to accept gay marriage, the people on the ground will naturally come to accept gay marriage as well, because it's a top-down transmission of values that forms the cornerstone of any religious organization. Because of that, we do see change from the people in the ground. We do see a change in social mindsets on the whole, because the people in society listen to what the religious leaders say. Because of that, all of their argumentation has fallen. Let's move on to the second point of contention on their responses to my first speaker. And fundamentally, opposition never denied the first argument that my first speaker brought to you, that religious groups were interested in gaining more followers and thus would change their beliefs as a consequence to ensure that their ranks remain flush with individuals. They never took down the core logic of this and merely skirted the point. That's no response whatsoever. The Dicks never tackled the idea of religious evolution, instead sticking to their own characterization that religion could never change. We've already conclusively proven how religion can change in this manner. Before I continue, yes sir.
When religions constantly change their views and lose their consistency, will people believe in it?
Sir, people will still continue to believe in it so long as the religion presents it in a manner that allows people to achieve what they deem to be important. For example, salvation and progression into heaven. That's precisely why people will continue to accept these changes. That's precisely why people continue to adhere to these religions even after we see numerous changes in their practices. That's all of their material taken down. I'm now transitioning to my own constructive arguments. Firstly, on helping closeted members within the church. This point will prove that it is in the best interest of religious groups to tolerate gay marriages, as it assuages the fears of homosexual members within the organization, thereby fulfilling the religion's base principles of embracing and helping all under their care. We need to recognize how many individuals within religious groups are closeted, in that they are gay but afraid of admitting to it in public, as the rhetoric coming from the religion essentially condemns them for their sexual orientation, and those seeking gay marriages are openly censured and damned. They fear being ostracized from the religious community, which they rely upon essentially as their support network to guide them in their life. And this ultimately prevents the religion from achieving what is in their own best interest, of meeting the basic principles of love and acceptance to protect their own supporters. Conversely, with at least the acceptance of gay marriage by these religious groups, closeted gay members within their ranks are now incentivized to step forward and seek assistance from this religious community that they hold dear, because their fears of hellish imprisonment for admitting to homosexuality are lifted. They now feel readily integrated into this group, which they are proud to state their allegiance to. And this is ultimately in the best interest of religion as a whole, because it meets their holy aspirations of unity within the congregation. We give you the example of how numerous churches in the United States and China run anti-homosexual camps to so-called beat the gay beliefs out of their own members through physical torment and emotional abuse. And this is not in the best interest of the church, because it's going after its own members and persecuting them, flouting the fundamental principle of a common family. Therefore, allowing the church to fulfill its basic aims with respect to their own members allows the church to accept gay marriage, and this is in their best interest at the core. This brings me to my final argument on leading change in society. This argument will prove that accepting gay marriage is in the best interest of religion, as it maintains their position as the moral compass in society, leading the way for progress. The premise of this point is how religious groups and organizations are considered the moral standard of society, influencing the decision-making principles and therefore actions of vast numbers of people. In recent years, the growing acceptance of gay marriage in civil society has led to a disconnect between religion and the people. Therefore, it is in the best interest of the religious group to bridge this disconnect, so as to ensure the maintenance of their position as the spiritual and ethical leader of society. And the means to achieve bridging this disconnect is by accepting gay marriage, which sends a strong, progressive message to society. And this gets the ball rolling for society to venture forward and pursue further reforms in how they treat gay individuals and how they treat gay marriage as a whole. For example, Pope Francis, leader of over 1.2 billion Catholics in the world, recently reversed the Vatican City's stance on gay marriage, and he stated that homosexuals could still be admitted into heaven regardless of their sexual orientation. And this, by extension, swayed the mindsets of Catholics worldwide, spurring discourse, societal change, showing the power of religion in leading society to a more progressive model. And it is thus in the best interest of religion to preserve their position as the moral leader in society, in guiding people into what they should accept by accepting gay marriage. Because on proposition, we recognize that religions are founded on a very simple principle, that our hearts, our hopes, our aims are one. This is not to the exclusion of gay marriages, and this is precisely why I am proud to stand in proposition.
Okay, thank you very much. And it is now time for the second speaker of the opposition. Actually,
Ladies and gentlemen, it was 100 years ago when women finally won the right to vote after centuries of oppression. It was 50 years ago when the African Americans were finally accepted as equal after generations of segregation. And today, we believe it's time that the LGBT community are given their rights regardless of whatever interest, whether it's in the interest of the religious groups or not. Now, before I go into my substantive, let's address what Team Proposition has brought to us today. They talked about having these religious groups accept the gay marriage, but we don't think they can easily force religions to accept gay marriage. And we also think that this is not going to fully solve society's opposition against gay marriage. We think it's difficult because it's deeply rooted, and even the first step would be incredibly difficult for these entire bodies of religious groups to change. We don't think that we can directly engage the leaders of religions. We think we need to start at the followers of a religion. We think that it's impossible to stop people from acting against gay marriage, but it's impossible to ask entire groups of religions, millions and millions of people, to change their mindset in a snap. We think that although the leaders of religion are more static than the followers, which is why we think that we need to engage the roots of the religion. There's a saying that when the followers lead, the leaders will follow. No, thank you. And that's why we think that we can't ask these religious groups as a whole to accept gay marriage. We think that we need to start at the individuals of the religion. We think
ideas of an 80-year-old priest who's grown up in an environment where they told them gay marriage was wrong, it's easier to change the ideals of young followers of these religions to accept them and then further ensue change and reforms in their religion. So we think that their idea of trying to change it from top to bottom is just simply ridiculous and it's not implausible. And instead we need to start at the bottom and we will offer alternatives on how we're going to do this later. So, an additional point of contention is that, no thank you, that just changing these religious groups is going to solve all opposition to these LGBT communities. We think that religious groups aren't the only groups that are stopping these LGBT groups from gaining their rights, and these aren't exclusive. It's not exclusive to people persecuting LGBT rights. We think that this is not the only group that's condemning the gay community. We think that we need to reach out to those non-religious groups as well. No, thank you. Because what they said was that the main goal of religious groups was to help ensure the safety and the happiness of our society. We think that the religious groups isn't the only driving factor into this, and that's where the government, we think, should step in. So, on to my substantive. Our first speaker talked about how it's difficult for religious groups to accept the LGBT community, and I will follow up with 2 points. Firstly, that religious groups don't affect gay marriage in our secular society, and secondly, I'll be talking about addressing the underlying issue and actually changing the society's mindset so that the religious groups are fulfilling their duty. No, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we no longer live in a time where the church walks hand in hand with the government and hand in hand with this mindset of society. So we think that just by changing certain religious groups' mindsets isn't going to change in the outlook to the LGBT community. We think that in our secular system that we live in, it's not just about the interests of religious groups, it's the interests of the LGBT community themselves. So this will bring me into my first point, that religious groups don't play the main role against gay marriage. And from gay marriage, we think that when this gay marriage is accepted, that they will be fulfilling the duty of, no thank you, of their religion. So we think that there are many other groups that are unrelated to religion that harass the LGBT community. And the religious groups are not the only contributing factor into causing problems. Many students, whether they're in religious schools or not, still face discrimination and harassment. We think that this is the underlying issue that we need to solve, that if we solve the society's outlook into LGBT communities, we can change society as a whole. And we think that by doing this, religious groups follow with it. No, thank you. So, we've talked about how religious groups aren't the only contributing factor. Let's talk about how we're going to address this in our alternatives. We think that by spreading, because this is a relatively new concept, so many people are still opposed to gay marriage. This is exactly why we don't think just because one statement Pope Francis said that the entire world is going to start accepting gay marriage. No, thank you. We think that by implementing education, public awareness campaigns, we can easily affect the whole society as a whole, not just people in religions. And when I say education, obviously we're not going to be talking about offering college courses on LGBT rights. We're going to be spreading awareness in our society through education campaigns. For example, we think that education campaigns like this can easily be implemented into high school programs. No, thank you. For example, according to the Public Policy Institute of California, 73% of parents agreed that sexual orientation programs and educations about these programs are appropriate topics for high school students. So what do we see from this? We think that after we implement these programs, that the young people can actually understand and accept, no thank you, accept gay marriage. From this, we think that it will influence the higher ups, and that's how society is going to change. So we think that with education, we're going to solve the underlying issues of the stigma associated with the LGBT community. We think that this will then solve the issues, the opposition against gay marriage. No, thank you. We think because that religious groups aren't the interests of the religious groups aren't the only topic at hand. We that the interest of the LGBT group is just as important. And we think that through education and spreading awareness is exactly how we're going to do this. So ladies and gentlemen, because we believe that we can't simply force religious groups to change their mindset that quickly, that we think we should start at the smaller things, that because it's so difficult to change centuries of a mindset, we think that we should implement education and spreading public awareness. We are proud to oppose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to the second speaker. And it is time for the first of two whip speeches by the proposition by Jeanette.
We understand that religion and mindsets on the ground take time to change. But that doesn't mean we don't start somewhere. That doesn't mean we don't step in to implement the stance taken on side opposition. Because when you listen to the kinds of logic that was coming from opposition, it simply can be summed up into just because something has been done for an extremely long time, you should not change it because it cannot be changed. And that essentially summed up the entire logic that ran through the entire opposition bench today. But using their own examples of women coming up to have the ability to vote, the abolishment of slavery, all these were things which also similarly took time to change sentiments on the ground. But we had to start somewhere. They had to start with governments coming in to implement the abolishment of slavery, with governments coming in to give women the right to vote, and that's why sentiments on the ground similarly changed after the government stepped in to change it. So even though it's hard, we're not afraid to try, and we're not afraid to ensure that these individuals get the rights that they want, using their own examples as brought to us in their second speaker of women gaining the ability to vote. Because on opposition, when they believe that they would stand for slavery because society wasn't ready for it. They would stand for these sorts of sentiments because they believed that bottom-up change was the best way forward. But that's really not true. So let's really examine this debate in two main points of contention. Firstly, on what's best for these religious institutions, and secondly, what's best for society. Let's deal with the first point, what's best for religion. Under this was their first speaker's standards on how it holds cultures and traditions which take an extremely long time to change. My second speaker already told you why the change is easy to come about because because they can change and because the church acts as a moral compass for society. Let's give you additional reasons that even if it is hard to change and sentiments on the ground take time, what happens with the proposition is that we set important standards for society to follow. We implement the sort of standards that society needs to follow, and we set up a set of expectations for people to follow, which means that they can now have a goal to work towards, and that's where sentiments actually on the ground actually start to change. Just because something is hard doesn't mean we don't try. But then here's where they actually conceded that it's idealistic, but the top-down change will actually work in their first speaker. That already concedes that even if it's a minority, it still makes a difference within society. That's why cultures and traditions, even if it's hard to change, we have to come and set the important standards for society to follow at the end of the day. Now let's move on to the second idea, which was our first speaker's second substantive on the evolution of religion. Here was an idea which they never responded to on the fluid concept of religion, on how religion isn't a monolithic concept, but rather is subject to the opinions on the ground. And the only response we heard to this was that if that's the case, people won't follow the religion. That's really not true, because as rational individuals, people are able to identify that it's of the religion because they know that there is greater study of and greater scrutiny of the text, and they know that the result of this change is because of greater study of particular religious text at the end of the day. But conversely, on opposition, it's even worse, because going by their logic that religions always have to be consistent and never be subjected to change, opposition would stand for things like the persecution of women. They would stand for things like women never leaving the house in highly conservative societies because they believe that religions shouldn't be subjected to change. That was the side that opposition stood for. That was something we could never condone at the end of the day. Now let's move on to our first substantive proposition on upholding religious aims by providing salvation. Here was a substantive never responded to at all. Let's give you additional reasons for why this is extremely important, because these form the base principles of any particular religion, and this is what your religion is essentially built upon: the ideas of love, care, and concern. Therefore, these are principles that we fundamentally cannot ignore at the end of the day, because these are what religions are built on at the end of the day, which is why it's extremely important, even if it ends up clamping down on others, even if it means a balance between other sorts of beliefs. In a minute, sir, like the acceptance of gays, these form the basis of any particular religion. Yes, sir?
Are these religious groups changing their views because society wants them to, or because they want to?
No, sir, these religions change their views because of, as a result of greater study and scrutiny of the text, where they adapt to changing circumstances at the end of the day, because it is no longer logical for the Pope to continue saying that contraception cannot be allowed in the age where AIDS is extremely rampant. Therefore, they adapt to changing circumstances to do what's best for their people, which means that the reasons why religions adapt is to ensure the protection of the people, not necessarily because society and on-the-ground sentiments want them to change, but because they're always looking out for the interests of its people at the end of the day. That's something they never understood. Now let's move on to the second big point of contention on what's best for society. Under this, they tried to tell us that, under this was our third substantive on helping society, especially these gay individuals who are being persecuted. The responses we heard to this was that, firstly, they do it anyways because of entrenched mindset, and secondly, these individuals have the right to believe whatever they want to do so. Here's where we're going to bring you the argument that within society itself, they always draw a balance between religion as well as the protection of these, as well as the protection of a particular group within society. Therefore, within this giant pool of rights, they balance off rights to ensure that the protection of these particular individuals, which are your gays, are being protected within society, even if it means these individuals don't have the right to believe what they want to. But let's really fundamentally point out that proposition never stood for these individuals not believing in whatever they wanted. Right from my first speaker, we already told you that acceptance is fundamentally different from embracing, which means that these individuals still have the ability to believe in whatever they want. These individuals still can hold their practices and their beliefs at the end of the day. Now let's move on to their second speaker's first substantive, where they tried to tell us that LGBTs don't play the main role. Let's just point out this substantive didn't even answer the motion at the end of the day, because she tried to tell us that this is the best interest of LGBT groups. But we're debating about whether it's in the best interest of religious institutions at the end of the day. But let's take down her arguments anyways, because firstly, it's not mutually exclusive as to whether we work on these LGBT organizations coupled with the fact that we work with religious organizations. But more than that, religious organizations are extremely effective because of the fact that they hold a strong religious support base. As my first speaker brought out to you, they considered within their first speaker's POI when they answered that top-down change does actually work. But more than that, they had the ridiculous assumption to tell us that the government should step in to ensure that this sort of top-down change is being implemented. But going by their own logic, that top-down change is extremely bad, then government stepping in similarly on opposition is even worse, because governments have completely no understanding at all about the particular religion, and therefore change coming from religious groups is more effective to ensure that sentiments on the ground change. And lastly, they tried to tell us that we have education campaigns in programs, high schools, but but such rhetoric is consistently being undercut by religious beliefs, which renders it completely ineffective at the end of the day. And lastly, on the last two ideas of helping closeted gays and change in society, were ideas completely dropped on opposition, which is extremely important. Therefore, because our hearts, our hopes, our aims are one, I am proud to stand on proposition.
much. And it's time for the last substantive speech of the debate, delivered by Chair Ross. Sorry.
Ladies and gentlemen, both sides in today's debate recognize the gay community's right to marriage. While Team Proposition believes in an ironic model of religious groups benefiting from undermining their long-held beliefs, we believe that religious groups can't accept gay marriage, won't accept gay marriage, but most importantly, don't benefit from accepting gay marriage. And that's why we say that it is certainly not in the interest of religious groups to accept gay marriage. Now, the burden on our team today was to prove 3 points. First, we needed to prove that religious groups have the same beliefs that they had in the past and the same beliefs they have right now. Second, we needed to prove that the acceptance of gay marriage undermines their beliefs and interests. Third, we needed to prove that acceptance from religious groups doesn't fix the core issue of the problem. The burden on this team today was to prove 2 points. First, they needed to prove that their model is feasible and that religious groups will willingly accept gay marriage. But rather what we heard was from the top, they'll issue a command saying we're going to accept gay marriage, but we haven't heard if the entire religious community will accept that. And then second of all, they needed to prove that somehow going against your lifelong beliefs acts in your best interest. Now, I'm going to analyze this debate with 2 questions. First, will these religious groups accept gay marriage, and is Prop's model feasible? And the second question I have to ask is, how would it act in the best interest of these religious groups to do so? Now, first of all, we noticed a major contradiction in the arguments of Team Prop. Now, first they said that religions change to appear progressive, and they do this in order to gain more followers. But later on, they say that religions change because of love and care. Now, we think that majorly contradicts, and we'll see why later on. With that in mind, let's head into our rebuttal. Now, first point of contention they brought up was about how they're fulfilling religious aims, how they look to appear more tolerant, look to appear more accepting of others, and thus their religion will be branded and their religion will spread to others. But we say the people who have these long-held beliefs, their beliefs would be undermined and they would be disillusioned by their own church. And then secondly, we have to say that moving to the middle and becoming more conservative doesn't necessarily gain you more followers. For example, if you look at the Republican Party, whenever these presidential candidates are moving to the middle and becoming less conservative, then they tend to lose their followers from their own party. So if you move to the middle, your supporters from your church would leave you as well. Now, second, about this point, about the evolution of religion. They talked about continual progression, they talked about the needs to change views, and the relevance in society. The main thing we have to say about this is these religious groups are not changing for their own benefit, they're changing because society is asking them to. For our first response to this is these religious groups haven't necessarily changed their views at all. I mean, it's scientifically proven that the Earth is the center of the universe. Evolution is proven, but these religious groups don't change their views and beliefs. And our second response is, if these groups constantly change their views, then they can't have any consistency whatsoever. I'll take you in a moment, Adam. Then these groups can't have any consistency, they lack conviction and belief, and we have to remember that the most important thing in religion is conviction and belief, and once you constantly change these views, your supporters will be disillusioned as well.
Pope Francis has accepted gay marriage, so have individuals in the Vatican City. This takes out all your assumptions that individuals can never change their
I understand your point, Madam. Well, that's a wonderful thing to say, but just because Pope Francis, right from the top, says that doesn't necessarily mean that your entire religious followers are going to change their beliefs. In fact, radical Christian groups could even perhaps be angered by this sudden shift in view, and that's why we say that their point falls on that. And then they talked about the persecution of gays and such, but we say that while religion promotes tolerance, we haven't seen it thus far. And then we say, while you be commended by the rest of society for taking these progressive stances, ultimately you would lose your followers because you're constantly changing your views, and we don't think that benefits your church. Now, they made this point about adherence to the top, and how your supporters will gradually accept. Now, we have 2 responses to that. First, these religious groups won't have any consistency. The people, the general public, their followers, would simply think that these guys are flip-flopping in order to gain public support. They would believe that the church is not standing by their views, but simply changing their views in order to be accepted by the rest of society. No, thank you, sir. And then, second of all, as we mentioned before, the more radical groups would protest, they would be outraged, and in this would change. Now, about this other point about helping homosexual members within churches. But we say that, as we mentioned before, just because your pope says something doesn't necessarily mean your entire base of supporters will change. So we actually say that under their model, once the homosexual community comes out, they will actually be in danger, because there are still people who are against gay marriage. You are not attacking the problem at its heart. You are simply issuing commands from the top. Then they went on to say that the church is a moral compass in society, and that the church is leading change in society, and that it sends a progressive message. Now, sure, society would commend the church for having these views, but second of all, we say that these religious groups would lose credence, as people would interpret these groups of simply trying to gain public favor rather than sticking by their views. They would interpret this as these churches desperately resorting to attempts to gain more followers. And we say, with governments becoming increasingly secular, we can achieve gay marriage without the approval of these religious groups. We believe that we don't necessarily, just because a Christian church is not behind gay marriage doesn't mean that gay marriage won't be accepted. Now, let's see how the models contrast. First of all, they claim that just because the top of the church is accepting gay marriage, your entire base will fall in support of that. But we don't think so, as we stated before. And then we propose changing the social mindset through public awareness campaigns and through education. As we mentioned before, we believe that if we provide education, if we provide public awareness, we can attack the issue at its core. Now, they mentioned this, as I stated before, this contradiction about how, first of all, they said that they're doing this in order, I'll get to you in a moment, they're doing this in order to gain public support, but on the other hand, they're doing this because of love and tolerance.
If you think the religious groups really need to stay so consistent, we allow them to continue to condemn women, to allow things like the rape of women.
We're not necessarily saying that. We're saying that when they constantly change their views and policies, then they tend to lose some of their supporters, and that doesn't benefit them. Now, in our substantive today, we brought you 2 points. First of all, we said it is not of interest of these religious groups to throw away long-held beliefs. Second, we stated how religious groups accepting gay marriage doesn't act in the interest nor attack the real problem at hand, which is the social mindset. Now, we believe that when you question these long-held beliefs, they'll eventually question other beliefs as well. If you question these very long-held stances on gay marriage, perhaps they will even question, they'll even question other things, such as evolution and such, and that questions their very existence, it questions their religion and their entire life as well. And we don't think it's conducive to a functioning society when your citizens are doubting themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, we do not think that it is in the interest of religious groups to accept gay marriages because we don't think it's feasible, we don't think it's viable and conducive to a functioning state. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to the censure, and it is now time for Ichigun as the first of 2 reply speeches delivered on behalf of the opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, we don't think you can ask an entire body of a religion that has stood for centuries, that has billions of followers, to change a core concept of their religion. We don't think it's in the interest of these religious groups to try and accept gay marriage, and we've told you with this for 2 points. Firstly, we've told you that it's implausible, simply because the idea of trying to force a completely different mindset than what they've been grown up to believe is to millions of people is not plausible. Secondly, we told told you that there are extremist groups in these religions that would be prone to backlash or prone to be doubtful of their religion. We also told you from this that when we tell them that these religious groups accept gay marriage, it exposes the gay individuals in those religions to people who still are against gay marriage. We think that puts their individuals at even greater risk than if these religious groups didn't say they were accepting gay marriage. We don't think that entire religious groups are going to change just from pressure of the government or just because one religious leader said so. We think we can see these from many examples. Even large companies like Oreo, who showed advocacy for LGBT rights, it led to major public backlash. Although there were some people who supported it, large groups gave much hate to these companies. They refused to continue on using these products. We think the same logic would apply to these religious groups because these are not just cookies. They are core fundamental beliefs that they were raised to believe. We think that they told you that all religions evolve. That we think this is also logically flawed because there's still many people in these religions who don't believe in evolution. They still if they were all that flexible and all that fluid to change to society's mindset, we think that are they saying that all Christians now believe in evolution? We don't think that's true at all. We think that by trying to force these beliefs that some would accept and some wouldn't, that this is creating fracturing in religious groups and this is causing disunification because they cannot prove to you that every single person in this religion is actually going to believe in accepting gay marriage. Additionally, we also told you that just because even if all these religious groups accept gay marriage, that this is going to solve the problem of advocating for ensuring LGBT rights. Because not everyone in the world is religious, and not everyone in the world who opposes gay marriage is that because of their religion. We think that just because these religious groups change, it's going to change. It's not completely going to help LGBT groups. We've told you how Team Opposition is going to address this. We told you that we're going to spread public awareness and campaigns, education campaigns for both religious and non-religious groups, so that our secular society can not only ensure the interests of these religious groups, because we're no longer forcing beliefs that they don't want to, we're also ensuring the interests of these LGBT groups, because they can now have and experience their rights without having to be oppressed. Ladies and gentlemen, we think that these religious groups accepting gay marriage is not in the interest of these religious groups, it's not in the interest of these LGBT groups, and we don't think it's in the interest of society. We are proud to oppose.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last second speech and the final speech of the debate will be delivered by the Aloysius on behalf of the opposition. The floor is yours.
It was all very simple. Just because something has been done for a long time, and just because people accept it at face value, doesn't mean we shouldn't change it. Today's motion wasn't about if religions would change, or if it was even practical. Today's debate was about what was in the best interests of religious groups. And to that end, opposition never recognized this context, never argued on that ground. But we took down their material anyway. Because on proposition, we recognize that religions change for a spectrum of reasons. And this was the yardstick that we clearly established in our first speaker, that we wanted what was best for the evolution and expansion of these religious groups. But in response, we had an opposition side that was very much like their own characterization of religion, static, unchanging. That was their main line of argumentation and rebuttal that we've consistently taken down in all three of our constructive speakers. They thought that we were trying to force religions to change, but that was never our stance. What we did argue for on proposition was how it was in the best interest of religion if they changed. And by the end of the debate, most, if not all, of our arguments that we presented remained standing. Let's analyze this in two key areas of clash. Firstly, on the idea of change. Is it even possible? And secondly, what happens after you change? On the first idea of change, is it even possible? And here was opposition's main line of attack, that it simply wasn't possible or practical for religions to change because these beliefs were already so entrenched. And in response to that, we had a number of replies. Firstly, that it wasn't difficult to change because religion is at its heart a fluidic construct that will evolve in response to society. And we saw religions move in examples where they moved from Latin texts to vernacular English Bibles. They moved from anti-contraception to pro-contraception. They moved from the mindset that gays will burn to a progressive mindset that gays can still go to heaven. These are all fundamental beliefs that religions have changed. Our second answer was that it doesn't undermine the basic principles of religion because it's principally consistent, because religions aim for acceptance, tolerance, love, and charity, for salvation for the people who believe in them. And that's precisely why they will change to accept gay marriage. And we also forwarded to you how acceptance wasn't equivalent to embracing, and that's why the yardstick was already very low and they could accept that change. And fundamentally, it was always good to aim for change. Therefore, change would indeed happen, and it was in the best interest of religions. Here's where our own arguments came in. Firstly, on how religion fundamentally wants to evolve, and how this evolution allows them to gain more followers in society as a whole. And that was what was in their best interest. All of this was plausible, all of this unresponded to by opposition. On to the second big idea on what happens after you change. And here was our main argument that change was in the best interest of religion for all the reasons that we brought to you. And all opposition tried to do was disprove the practicality of that situation. It wasn't until late in their third speaker that they actually talked about how the benefits wouldn't actually manifest. And even then, they were never able to take down our argumentation. Here they only question us about the plausibility of top-down change, even as we forwarded the concept of how people listen to their religious leaders. That's precisely what your religion is built upon, an adherence to your popes, an adherence to your priests, an adherence to your imams in Islam. Never mind that it was flip-flopping in the religious stance, they would listen so long as they believed that it granted them salvation. We brought to you a slew of arguments on the protection of gays both within the religious organization and outside of the religious organization. We brought to you how it was in the best interest of religion to maintain its position as a moral compass in society. All of that unresponded to the end, dropped, conceded by opposition. Because in the final analysis, on proposition, our hearts, our hopes, our aims were one. And that was why we truly did what was in the best interest of religious groups.